Hello guys, a video long overdue about backing up our SQL Server databases. Yeah, I wrote some bullet points here to go over, but there's also a very good article about backing up SQL Server databases. This one, feel free to pause the video, go to the URL and follow along. But let's talk about something else first. As you might have seen, I'm running my databases in Docker and I'm using the Table Plus program just to view, a bit like SQL Server, but way more lightweight. And the reason I am using this is because I started out on a MacBook where I couldn't run SQL Server easily. And that's also the reason, of course, why I'm using Docker to have a SQL Server running in a containerized environment and then accessing it with this light tool Table Plus thingy. But now I'm on a Windows machine. So this is kind of overkill and actually makes things a bit more complicated. So if you're running in SQL Server and on a Windows machine, just keep doing that. And we'll talk about another tool, Azure Data Studio, in a bit. Let's see. The reason why I'm going over these other tools is because as much as I love this Table Plus lightweight program, I failed to back up my data properly. That's quite a critical functionality. Table Plus seems to work with PostgreSQL SQL databases, Postgres databases, and other kinds of databases, but it doesn't seem to support SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server databases to backup, that is. Let's try it. Utils DB, and it says start backup, doesn't support, blah, blah, blah. Then other possibilities is to go into a database, select all the tables, and do some kind of export. But unfortunately, this has always been going wrong for me. Each time I try to then restore a database, importing this exact data, either the formatting was wrong I or it doesn't support, like that's a stupid thing here. It doesn't support, it supports exporting as JSON, but it doesn't support importing JSON. So that's from CSV or SQL dump. And for some reasons, it always goes wrong. In the meantime, I'm on the trial version of this program, so they took away my search, my query functionalities, and you can only have 3 tabs open and all that annoying stuff. So yeah, I'm going to abandon this tool and use the Microsoft and Azure tools. I might still use it to just quickly view some database, whether some new user signed up or something, but nothing major. So let's close this one. Then the next thing would be SQL Server. I have this installed, and it took quite a while to start up. And then it can connect to my Azure databases, but it can't out of the box connect to my Docker databases, my databases running in Docker. You can configure some settings to allow remote connections or something like that, and then it should work, but it doesn't. So I'm not going to use SQL Server. If you have databases not in Docker, like just running on your local machine in SQL Server, feel free to keep using that. Would be solid uh, a solid solution for that. Also, when you're using SQL Server locally, and let's say you want to export your production database into a BOK file or a backpack file, then you could probably use SQL Server Management Studio to restore your local database with the production database. So just to have like a local version of your production database, that could probably work. Since I'm working with these Docker containerized databases, I can't connect to them easily using SQL Server Management Studio. So I'm going to use Azure Data Studio. And here you simply create a new connection and connect to them. You can use either a connection string or the parameters. And it's pretty straightforward with a SQL login. Yeah. This can connect to my Docker databases, as you can see. Still not a fan of the select top 1000 thing. Should be easier to quickly view your data. But out of the box, you can't do much with backing up and restoring. What you need is this data tier application wizard. For that to work, you need an extension, the admin pack for SQL Server. You have to install this one. And then this data tier option becomes available. What you can then do is, first two I'm not really using. It's just like making backpack files. And then you have the bottom two, import backpack. Backpack is essentially a compressed version of the deckpack. Or you could export schema and data to the logical backpack file. This one I use to make manual backups. So export files, backpack files, which I could then restore a local database with, or like create a new database from that file. And that way I have for example, let's say I extract the production database and I create a new local database with that backpack file, then I have an exact copy running locally from the production database, which could be useful. So now let's actually, is that all you need? Yeah, you might need to have to enable preview settings on. Preview features, I think. Features. Just make sure enable unreleased preview features is toggled on. This is also needed for some kind of import stuff. Let's see what this import. Import wizard. Oh yeah, this is just if you want to import certain tables or something, not the entire database. I think, accidentally closed it. Anyway, let's go over this list. We might have to open it up again. Let's see, we can probably take a backup like this. So export this schema and data from the database into a backpack file. Or it might not be supported actually. Let's see. Mm, 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 mm. Let's just do it in a folder. Backups production. We'll have the name of the database and the timestamp, like date and time. Let's see if it works. Okay. Seems to be working. Yeah, for some reason, if you click manage in here, you don't have a backup option because it's not supported, but apparently you can, with that extra admin pack extension, you can export, use the data tier application wizard to export everything. Because on a local database, if you click manage, you get this backup option and restore option. For some reason, that isn't supported on a Azure SQL Server database. Yeah, cloud hosted one. A cloud managed one, excuse me. Another thing, unfortunately, because why I mentioned the Docker stuff is because this database is running in Docker, it's only able to access my files within the Docker container. So I can't really select a file on my local Windows machine. Oops. So that's quite a problem. That's why I wouldn't recommend using Docker if you are on a Windows machine, because it only complicates that, yeah, the process of taking backups, copying files over, and all that stuff. That is if you want to use the backup and restore function here. If you use the data tier application wizard, you can just import from wherever you want, which is nice. You can just have my local documents backups in here. Let's see, like that. Oh, yeah, whatever. It works. Let's say for some reason, yeah. Let's say you want to export another way to export a Azure managed SQL Server database if you don't have this data tier application wizard, for example. You could do, it's really nice that it actually works, because if you are on your portal, let's see, and you go to a database, let's go to this utils database, and you click on, what was it again? Something like backups. Might be on the SQL Server, not on the database. So on the SQL servers, you go to and then you click on backups. You could no, I'm wrong again. It's in the SQL databases, utils database, and then I think export in here on the database. But what you now need, so it's similar like the data tier application function in Azure Studio, Data Studio. But what you need is link a storage account, a blob storage account to that. So I already did it, but you need a blob store container. Yeah, I made a new container, backups. I selected that one. What you then do is once you enter the password of your SQL Server, it will do the same thing, but instead of copying it locally, it will copy that to the storage, the blob storage. So I'm not going to do that now because I already did it. Let's go take a look at the containers, backups. And then you see I have utils database. I did it yesterday. .backpack, and then you can simply download that file. And then you can use that file to, yeah, like I mentioned, data tier application, create a database from backpack file, for example. That's what I did in this one, local backup. And this is an exact copy of my, let's see, an exact copy of my production database, but I took it locally. Yeah, and that's about it. But actually, you could do everything, all that import and export stuff. You can just do it within Azure Data Studio, which is really nice. And Azure Data Studio is a bit more lightweight and a bit faster. And you can connect to Docker containers and all that stuff. So that's ideal for what we need. Let's see. So you can either use the Azure portal into a blob store or the Azure Data Studio using the data tier application wizard. For local restore, you can use the data tier application wizard. And let's say you want to restore a production database with a backup of a production database, you can probably do that in the Azure service by restoring from a backpack file in the storage, or you could probably also use, I wonder now if you need to create a database from this file. So that means, actually means you should drop the current database and create a new one, which is maybe not ideal. But this is like, wait, dropping this database would actually not be the worst. If you, of course, if you're sure you have a backup. Because this one, it's not like you're gonna delete the resource from Azure, I think. Because this also has a master database. So basically, if I were to do this, create a new database from backpack file, it would create a new database within that connection. Let's see. Backups. That's basically the same as I did locally. I was going to create a new database with this name instead of the original name. So you can't really, the original name would be something like this. Or what is it? UtilsDB, I think. then it says a database with the same name already exists. So that means you need to drop the original one and create the new one. But yeah, that's how to manually backup that stuff. Why do I say manually backup? Because there's also something like point in time recovery where Azure would automatically take some backups from your database and you could restore from that, if I'm not mistaken, if you do. So point in time or something else, but that only keeps databases up until 7 days in the past, I think, versions at least. Unfortunately, my problem with that, each time you do a migration, if I'm not mistaken, that changes the database structure, you kind of lose the point-in-time backups, if I'm not mistaken, because in the past I tried to restore from a point in time, and when I actually wanted to select one in the past, it said, "Oh, we only have the current one," which was not helpful because that was missing all the data. But that's also it's also logical, I think, if you do a migration that changes the database structure, you're gonna have issues restoring from a earlier copy. So, well, in theory, it should reset an earlier database, so without the change in structure. But anyway, I'm not an expert in the database stuff. That is at least how I can make sure I have some local backups and to fall back on. So that's all for this video.